Welcome to The Moderator. I'm your host, Daryl Hill, and today we have Mr. Ron Harvey. He's the president and COO of Dominion Financial Management. How you doing?
I'm fine. Pleasure to be on the show, Daryl.
Mr. Harvey, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, Daryl, in the past 15 years, I've been in the community development industry. I was in a nonprofit organization as a manager for an affordable housing organization in Nashville. Then spent some time in corporate America as a community development manager for 2 major banks. And now I am back into nonprofit world where I'm running a organization with my wife, helping people impact their personal finances.
Okay, and that's great, because we want to talk about owning your home.
Okay.
And I understand you have a little bit of experience in that.
Just a little bit, yeah.
First thing we want to talk about is, how do you know if somebody is ready to purchase a home?
Well, saying are you ready is one of those things that you have to look at your pros and cons as you're trying to develop a issue of whether you're going to buy a home. Let's start with the pros first. Tax advantages are a great consideration for someone who wants to purchase a home. You have tax advantages for a home buyer. As a renter, you don't have any. Another thing that you have to look at is equity. When you build equity into the house, that means that you're making payments on the mortgage, and as the value goes up, you have more consideration for value in the property. So that's one of the things that happens when a person becomes a homeowner versus a renter. The other things that you're talking about, control over your environment. As a renter, you're constricted. Your landlord tells you what to do, how to do it. As a person who owns a home, you get to do your own thing. Paint the walls the way you want to, plant the flowers the way you want to. Some of the cons that you have, of course, is once you purchase that home, that's it for a while. There's no flexibility as far as mobility is concerned. So you're going to be in that home for quite some time. The other thing that you have to be concerned about as a renter or a person who's going to buy a house versus renting are the maintenance issues that you have. Because as a person who's renting, the landlord, of course, is going to take care of all your maintenance issues. As a homeowner, you are the landlord, so you're taking care of all those maintenance issues. Okay.
And you had talked about equity. Now, is that a real important issue for the first-time home buyer?
It's an important issue, yes. Can I say it's vital? Not really, but it is an important issue because after time, you want to make sure that your investment is growing as far as value is concerned. And you know, as the first few years of having that mortgage, you're not going to pay a lot of principal down versus interest. You're paying a lot of interest. So you would like to have the property gain in value. So that would be very important, because if you plan on what they call upgrading after maybe 3, 5, 7 years, you want to take that money out of that house after you sell it and put it to your next house.
Is that why they talk about location?
Absolutely, absolutely. The better the location, the better the value of the house. That's absolutely correct.
So there are a couple of questions that a potential home buyer definitely needs to be aware of. Like you talked about, there are pros and there are cons with owning a home.
Correct.
Okay, and another, I guess, issue for a first-time home buyer would be understanding credit.
Mm-hmm.
And what are some of the things that the home buyer would need to understand as far as credit, besides the credit score? Because everybody talks about the credit score, but what are some of the other things?
And I would not necessarily address the credit score per se, because it's very complicated. It's not very easy. I mean, you know, people in our industry, as you well know, have a hard time trying to figure out what the credit score is. Some of the things that people can do is pay their bills on time. That's one of the major issues that you have to do, is when the bill comes due, pay it. One of the things that you have to also make sure that you understand as far as understanding credit is making sure that you don't tap out your line of credit. So if you have a credit card that has a $1,000 balance, that you don't want to use the entire $1,000. You want to use some of it and then pay it off as time goes on. Well, you really would want to do it if you're going to use the card and pay it off immediately. That's going to be important. But if you have to keep a balance, you want to make sure that you have a plan that you pay it off over a certain amount of time.
And I understand there are a couple of there's Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. Are
Correct.
they the only 3 credit bureaus that are out there?
They're the main 3 credit bureaus. There's one that's Vantage that uses the Vantage score, but that has not gained in popularity lately. So I would say that if you have your credit scores available for the 3 major credit bureaus, you're going to be in good shape.
And I also understand that you have the opportunity now to access a free credit report as well.
That's correct. And what you need to do is to go to annualcreditreport.com, and by law, you're entitled to a free credit report once a year. Now, that credit report will not have your credit score. You may have to pay an additional fee for that credit score, but you will have an idea of what's going on as far as your credit is concerned.
And why is that important in today's age?
Well, I don't even know if we have the time available, Daryl, but one of the things that you need to do, you need to know your what's on that credit report, because if you're going to a lender, you want to make sure that your bills are paid off. There's a statistic out that says, I think this is from FICO.com, that at least 60% of the credit reports out here are erroneous. So it's your responsibility as a consumer, as the one has the credit report, to make sure those credit scores or your credit report is okay. So you may have a bill that you paid off 2 years ago that maybe that creditor didn't show as being paid. So you have to make sure that you write a dispute letter, making sure that those things are off your credit report so it won't damage your credit score.
Now, you talked about having a dispute letter. Is that something that you handled at your nonprofit?
We can handle that, yes. What we would advise the person to do, or suggest the person to do, is to go through one of the 3 major credit bureaus and try to get their credit report from there. And then they can do a dispute letter online. It's a little bit faster for them to get a response back versus writing a full-fledged letter. That usually takes about 30 days for the creditor to respond, or the credit reporting agency to respond to someone.
Now, if somebody had a dispute or a collection, would you advise them to actually call the creditor and try to get a payment plan or dispute the entire cost?
I would at first try to do it by letter, because if you have a hard copy of something that has proof there as compared to making a phone call, because if you make a phone call to a creditor, for example, they could say that they never ever talked to you. So if you have a letter sent to them, calling is nice, but having that letter is important. Getting that information as far as where their address is and writing down the account number, that's going to be very important. Also sending it to that creditor and letting them know, listen, I have a dispute about this, whether or not that the bill is authentic or not, and then letting that creditor come back to you and answer that particular question.
Okay. Now, what if you have a collection call and the person on the other line, of course, is saying, hey, we would like for you to send us $1,000, and say it's been like 5-year-old debt. Do you recommend that they try to talk them down a little bit?
Depending on how old it is, and you made a major point there, that if it's 5 years old, of course, information may drop off after 7 years. That's the rule of thumb, and that's the law. But you may want to go ahead and first of all talk to that creditor and making sure that that collection account is legitimate. So you may want to call them and tell them, or as you're talking to them on the phone, make sure that they send something in writing to make sure that it is a legitimate bill. Because again, it could be a dispute that you've paid it off already and they're trying to get more money out of you. So you want to be making sure that it's very careful. Then after you get that information, you can call them back and say, let's say, for example, the amount is $1,000. So you may say, I have $500 in my account. Can we negotiate that out? And as long as they have that in writing and say that it's paid in full, then you're in good shape.
Okay. And I know credit's a very big part of purchasing a home. And since we've gone through this mortgage crisis, has that impacted the minimum credit score that perhaps a lender would want to see on your credit report?
Absolutely. Matter of fact, I was just reading an article about a week or so ago that the credit scores are loosening somewhat. But the average credit score around the country, to be honest with you, was about a 725. Now, a lot of first-time homebuyers don't have that particular score, especially ones that are dealing with affordable housing. So they're not going to have those particular scores. But now that that is lessening somewhat, we may see the market open up as far as housing is concerned, that those first-time home buyers that maybe do not have a 720 credit score would be able to access credit and be able to purchase a home.
Okay. So as we talked about, are you ready to purchase a home?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you had the pros and cons of buying versus renting. Like you said, there are major differences that a renter has than a home buyer.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next one we talked about is your credit score. And that has to be also a big influence. Now, have you seen, and if you know, have you seen, is it 580? I know you said 725, but what is the rough average of a first-time home buyer being able to get a loan?
Well, depending on the lender, of course, depending on the lender, and depending on what down payment products or any mortgage products that's available, you're looking at roughly about 620 to 640 that a first-time home buyer in this area in Middle Tennessee can probably get a mortgage loan. So that 725 that I was talking about is a national average, but in Middle Tennessee, it's a little bit lower. So if that person has paid their bills on time and they don't have any collections, or they've paid their collections off and they get their credit report run and they have a 640, they could come to our office, for example. We can help them and provide them with some assistance as far as some of those mortgage loans that are available for them.
Okay. Now say you did have a 580. Now, what's the real difference between a 580 and a 640 as far as credit score goes?
The big difference is your interest rate. I mean, there are some lenders that may do a 580, but they're going to charge you higher than market average. So the market average may be around 4.25, 4.50 right now. They'll have to charge you a 5.0, maybe a 6.0 because of the risk that they're taking because your credit score is lower. When you're getting to higher credit scores, that means lower interest rate, which means lower monthly payments for you.
So are you saying if I have a 725, then that means I'm probably paying my bills a little bit more regularly than someone who is a 580?
That's correct. That is correct. The 580 may have some blemishes on their report, maybe some medical issues, could be a collection, maybe even a judgment, for example, that's paid off. But that credit has not increased in score yet. So it's going to take them some time. The 725 person probably pays their bills on time, their credit limit is lowered, and so they've been doing a very good job, and so therefore the lender's going to reward them with a good interest rate.
Now, are there some products out there for somebody who is at a 600?
There are some products that lenders have that were called high interest mortgages. That they will go, again, above the market average. I would suggest to someone that they don't do that if we can look at their credit report and kind of work with them to see what's going on, because it may be a difference of paying off a bill. It may be a difference of getting that credit line down. That could change anywhere from 10, 20, even 50 points. So that would make a big difference, a big swing as compared to going for the 600 credit score. You know, in our day and time of our microwave society, everybody wants something at a certain time and they want it right now. And so sometimes if you have damaged your credit, you have to wait a little while to get those things repaired.
Okay. And I know right now the interest rates are very low, so it's probably a great time for someone to purchase a home.
I think it's an absolutely marvelous time for somebody to purchase a home. The values are going up. We're seeing the foreclosures going down just a bit, so that's a good thing. In Middle Tennessee, the values are incredibly doing well in Middle Tennessee, so it is a great time. There are products that are available. For example, our state housing agency, Tennessee Housing Development Agency, has a great choice program, which their interest rate, I believe now, has just been lowered to, I think, 3.99. So that's an incredible rate for somebody to get into a product, and they have to have a median credit score, if I'm not mistaken, of a 620. So that's a fantastic way to get in. Plus, they can provide down payment assistance for you.
Do they provide any programs for veterans?
Yes, they also have a veterans program. I don't recall the name of it, but they just announced that they are providing some assistance for veterans. So I would tell people also to go on the THDA website, thda.org, and look up some information for first-time homebuyers and for veterans as well.
Okay. Well, and we talked about first-time home buyers. What is actually a first-time home buyer?
That's a very good question. And so if you're going to define it by the standards of the National Housing, what I call agency, HUD, Housing and Urban Development, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, they're telling you that if you have not owned a home in the last 3 years, that you're eligible to become a first-time home buyer. Of course, the traditional method is someone who has never purchased a home before in their life. But if you have not owned a home in the last 3 years and sold it off and you have rented for the last 3 years, you can be eligible and become a first-time home buyer.
So if I've had a home but not in the last 3 years, I may be eligible for some of the first-time home buyer programs.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, well, I think that's very good information. Next, we always talk about credit, but part of credit is money management.
Absolutely.
Because I know that affects your credit score. Because
Yes.
you talked about paying the bills, and if you don't pay them on time, then your credit score messes up. So can you tell me some of the issues that you see with first-time home buyers as far as money management?
Well, one of the basic things that we try to, as an organization, Dominion Financial Management tries to emphasize to people is to have a working, what I would call a spending plan. Some people call it a budget. I don't like that word too much. We're getting a little bit modernized, so I would call it a spending plan. And a spending plan basically says, where's your money going? And so if you have a particular income, because you have to look at your net income, not your gross, but your net. Now, the lender will look at the gross income, but you need to look at your net income. And so what are you doing with that net income as far as utilities are concerned, or as far as rent is concerned, if you have credit cards, auto payments, all those particular things that go into a spending plan. And so you start looking at those things, and if you're able to afford a payment that is at least 30% of your gross, or excuse me, of your net monthly income.
And my net is that after taxes?
After taxes, after you know, all the health insurance that you may be taking out. You may have a 401k plan. So whatever that net is, whatever you're taking home, that is the amount that you need to do that. So if you do that on a 30% basis and figure out what your housing is, and I know people will say, well, Ron, the lenders do it 30% on gross. I'm saying even do it 30% on net and see what that looks like, because we can kind of play with the figures and see what's going on. Plus the fact you probably need a little bit of down payment. The more money in your savings is great. Some people say, you know, 15, 20%. You don't necessarily have to have 15 to 20% in your bank account. Would be nice, yes, for emergencies and if something would happen, but you can have at least 5% in your account, because you're going to have to use some of that money for closing costs and prepaids for that loan. So having those things in order, getting those things in order, trying to have a figure of what's happening with you, and having somebody like me looking at those things can give you an idea of whether or not you're ready for purchasing a home.
Why can't I just tell you what I do? Does that necessarily have to be written down, or can I just say, hey, this is what I have, and then you work with it?
Well, in this day and time, as busy as I am, I'm not going to have that off the top of my head. So a written plan is probably the best way to do it. And having that down, whether you're using pen and paper, whether you're using an Excel spreadsheet, whether you're using all this electronic software going on, such as Quicken, those things will have you keeping your money management together. Because I know, you know, for example, for myself, and I've got kids, and I'm running around and they're pulling at me, I'm not going to remember sometimes when that bill needs to be paid and when I have to have those things due. Well, if you have those things written down and you know that the electricity is due the 20th of the month, so you take time out to plan to have that money available for you.
Okay. And you talked about utilities, and in there I know it's going to be the groceries. Does the lender take those bills into consideration when they're talking about how much you can
And that's
afford?
a good question, Daryl, and the lender does not. They don't care about your utilities. They don't care about how much gas you put in your car. You know, gas is pretty expensive now. All they're going to do is take those bills, such as credit cards, student loan, auto payments. That's what they're concerned about. Of course, making your monthly payment on time on your rent is absolutely necessary. You need to do that as well.
Okay. Now, we always hear that the lenders are talking about certain ratios, 31% or 43%. I think that's on a FHA product. Can you explain to the audience what the 31 and what the 43 is?
Okay, well, the 31% is taking only your housing. So the lender, not the person working, the lender takes the gross monthly income and multiplies that by 31%. That gives you kind of what you can do with housing. The second part of that is what they call the back end. The 31% is your front end. The second part of that is your back end. So that 43% has to deal with any of your housing plus any other bills that you have. So if you go below that that 43%, then you're going to be in good shape. That means that you have an affordability factor that could be helpful in you purchasing that home.
Okay. Now, can you tell me, are there any little tricks? Because it's tough. Well, I know you don't want to call it budget, but it's tough being on a spending plan. Are there some little tricks that one can do to help them along the way of budgeting or creating a quality spending plan?
Well, of course, having a written plan is number one. That's probably primary. Talking about coupons, there are a lot of people don't want to deal with that, whether they're digital or hard copy, which I call out of the Sunday paper. That helps you decrease the amount of money you're going to spend on groceries. That's important as well. Having a plan to go into that grocery store. So not just saying, I'm just going to go buy a lot of groceries, having a written plan down and sticking to those particular plans. So that's important. Some of the things that you want to do is try to make sure that you're watching your utilities. So cutting off lights, making sure that your water's not running all the time. So, you know, very basic understanding of things that you're doing in life that you want to do to put that into your spending plan.
Okay. So as we talk about purchasing a home, we've talked about, are you ready? We talked about money management, and we've talked about understanding credit. And I know there's probably about 6 different items that you would go over in your class. And what would be the next thing? Because I already know the pros and cons, so I do want the house.
Okay.
I've already done the spending plan, so I can afford it. I already know the credit. So what else is available for me?
Well, then the next step is actually, and not so much in this order, so to speak, you're looking for a realtor to help you find a home. That's going to be key. You can go out and look for it yourself, but I think it would be a benefit for you to find an established professional who can help you run what they call a multiple listing service to find out where you want to buy in your area and ask the key questions that you need to do, because you may want to live in 4 or 5 different areas. That realtor will help you kind of decide what neighborhood is good for you. If you have kids, is it a community where it has a school, and how close is the school? If you want to live near the interstate, how far do you want to live away as compared to where you work? So those things are going to be key. Then the other thing as well, I would tell everybody to get pre-approved first, and that's looking for a lender. And getting pre-approved means that the lender is saying they're about 90% sure that they're going to give you this loan. So you're going in, giving them information about your monetary situation, maybe a tax return, for example. They're running the credit for you, getting a Social Security number for running the credit, and making sure that those the percentages that we talked about as far as owning that home is important, that 31% and that 43%. So they're looking at those particular things. And then after that, once you've got those professionals together and you're locked in, then it's a matter of what house you're going to find, going through that, getting pre-approved, then going through the closing, and then you're ready to talk about how you're going to keep that investment.
Okay. So now we have a house and we're into the home. And I know this was a little bit on pros and cons, but how do we protect that investment?
Well, one of the things, and this is going to sound very silly, but one of the things that we need to do is pay that mortgage on time. We've been in an industry in the last 7 years that we've had the worst housing outbreak that anyone has ever seen. They call it the Great Recession, and part of that was a housing crisis, so to speak. So making that payment on time, even making it payment before time. So if you know that it's due the first of the month, everybody knows that it's due the first of the month, making that payment before the first of the month. Then putting some money aside, maybe, if your house is worth $100,000 or your loan was $100,000, maybe putting $1,000 aside each year for home maintenance issues. Then you need to put in a little bit more for other surprises that may come up. You don't plan on tomorrow that you have a checklist that your car's going to break down. You just don't plan for that. So you've got to put that money aside to make sure that it's available. Then you can talk about some of the things that you may want to do as far as making extra payments on the house. Because depending on how long you stay there, some people stay there, on average, some people stay in the house about 7 years. So if you're going to stay there longer, you may want to make extra payments. One payment a year on a house may take that 30-year loan down to 22 years, for example. So you may want to think about those particular strategies as well. But you also want to maintain that home as well, making sure that you're doing your proper painting, making sure that your refrigerator, your dishwasher is running on time, running very well, because you don't want those things to break down because they're high maintenance issues. They're going to cost you a lot of money.
Okay. So we do need to be aware of the different appliances that are in our homes because they don't last forever.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Also, when we're talking about protecting our home, what about homeowners insurance? Is that something that you guys deal with?
Well, we talk about that. Homeowners insurance, of course, is vital because the lender wants you to have it for protection, and you need it for protection. So you need to probably deal with or talk to 3 insurance carriers to see what type of premium that you're going to pay, because everybody is not the same. So you may have a Hartford, a State Farm, and a Geico, for example, that may cover the house a different way and charge you a different premium. So you need to give them the information about the house, if it's a brick house versus stucco, how many rooms are in the house, what kind of heating or air conditioning you have in the particular house. So they're going to put this into a database and trying to give you some information about how much coverage is going to be. So that's going to be very important. Then you want to know how much you're going to cover the house for, and also the contents in the house, because that's very important. Everybody does, you may have some very expensive jewelry that your grandmother passed down to you. I may not have that. So that may cost you extra money on the premium versus extra money for me. So those things that you have to take into consideration.
Well, I would like to thank Mr. Ron Harvey. Thanks for being on
Pleasure.
the show.
It's a pleasure.
And this is going to end our first segment. We'll go on to another segment. And I know this probably goes on with protecting your home too. We'll talk a little bit about the foreclosure crisis.